The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody.
Well, Beth, can you believe it? It's our 150th episode.
I know. And the funny thing is, it didn't even dawn on me until I was plugging this week's topic into our episode spreadsheet. So we have this spreadsheet where we keep track of all the different topics that we've covered, just so that, we don't want to chance repeating something. And when I went to type it in, I was like, oh my gosh, it's 150.
Well, since you mention it, what really blows my mind is that 95% of our podcast, we do 2 stories per episode. That means we've done almost 300 different topics.
It's a lot of stuff. And sometimes as I'm scrolling through, I'll be like, oh my gosh, I forgot that we covered Mary Toft and the rabbits, or, specific topics that I completely forgotten about.
It's pretty incredible.
It is.
So what was your favorite episode?
I really liked the Joseph Simonton and the alien pancake episode. I thought that one was pretty fun.
Well, yeah, who doesn't want alien pancakes?
Well, apparently they didn't taste very good.
Doesn't matter. You didn't have to cook them yourself.
That's true. But then, there was some other weird ones we did, like strange things that have fallen from the sky, like the meat shower and the... Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Now that you said that.
I know.
There has been many that I've forgotten about.
I know. And my other favorite was the vanishing house.
Oh, yes, with the children.
Were there children?
There were. There were children that were playing, and they would go out on a walk, and they would see this house, and then it wouldn't be there afterwards.
Yes. See, you never know what you'll hear if you listen to our show.
I think I'm going to have to go back and read through all the older episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we hope you've all enjoyed them as much as we did making them. And we hope you enjoy tonight's episode because it's a great one. And we're not going to do any housekeeping tonight. We're going to skip it altogether. And Beth's going to tell us about her topic tonight.
All right. So there are a handful of cryptids that seem to be part humanoid in nature. I mean, it's even in their names. There's the most famous of all, Mothman. Then there's Frogman and Goatman, and even lesser-known ones like the one we talked about a few episodes ago, Owlman. But every once in a while, there's a humanoid creature that might seem a little more alien than cryptid, and yet exactly what they are is a total mystery. So for my half of tonight's episode, I want to tell you all about some encounters with humanoid creatures that have come to be known, at least in the case of Falkville, Alabama, as Metal Man. My story begins in 1973, but not in Alabama. It possibly begins in Mississippi. It was the evening of October 11th, and 42-year-old Charles Hickson and 19-year-old Calvin Parker were fishing along the west bank of the Pascagoula River in Jackson County. According to ClarionLedger.com, the two men suddenly heard a strange whirring or whizzing sound. But when they noticed blue flashing lights reflecting off the river, they assumed that it was just local police responding to a complaint about them being there. Except they couldn't see any actual police car, and Parker soon realized that the blue flashing lights were coming from the sky. The whirring sound had become a constant hiss. But before they could react, a blinding light shone down on them, and as the two men struggled to see what was causing it, Parker was able to make out something astounding. Hovering over them was a 30 to 40 foot long and 8 to 10 feet high craft, shaped like a football. Stunned, both men stared at this craft. And the next thing they knew, three very, very strange creatures seemed to float right out of it. They all had a single leg with a single toeless foot. They were each 5 or 6 feet tall, and they looked robotic, with elephant-like gray and wrinkled skin. Their heads were bullet-shaped, and their mouths were nothing more than slits. They may have had visible eyes and noses, but neither man could later recall what they looked like. They did remember their hands, though, because they resembled crab or lobster-like claws. The three creatures hovered over the ground and got close enough for one of them to put its claw around Parker's arm. Although he had been terrified just seconds before, Parker said in a 2018 interview that as soon as the creature touched him, he was overcome with a sort of trance-like numbness, and he believed that the creatures injected them with some sort of calming agent.
It sounds like something you'd see on TV in the 60s, like some B-rated movie.
I know, it really, really does. The creatures simply took hold of Parker and Hickson by the arms and floated them right up to and inside the craft. Once they were inside, they were still under some sort of numbing agent. They were conscious, but unable to do anything except just kind of float around wherever the creatures guided them. There weren't any seats on the craft or tethers of any kind. At some point, both men were brought over to some sort of machine that looked like a giant eye. This eye seemed to move all on its own, all around their bodies, as if it was scanning them. Neither one of them was physically harmed in any way while on board the craft, although Hickson later said that when he managed to look at Parker, all he could see on the younger man's face was pure fear. Then, just as quickly as they had taken the two men, the creatures simply floated them back down to the riverbank and disappeared. Once they were safely back on Earth, Hickson said that it took a while to bring Parker back to his senses, that the kid just seemed terrified out of his wits. But eventually, he was able to calm him down, and initially they agreed that they would never tell another soul about what had happened because no one would ever believe them. But after talking it over some more and arguing a little bit, they decided that they would go to the authorities and let them know what had happened. So they contacted the Keesler Air Force Base and then drove to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Fred Diamond and Captain Glenn Ryder interviewed both men, and initially they thought that they were 100% making it up. Despite Hickson answering all of their questions and describing everything he possibly could, the officers were pretty sure that it was nothing more than a hoax to get attention. Hoping to catch them in a lie, they left a hidden, voice-activated tape recorder in the room and made an excuse to leave. Now, the audio recording is actually available online. It's about 30 minutes long or so, and if you listen to it like I did, which I highly recommend everybody doing, and I'll put the link in our show notes, you will probably have the same impression that I did, that they absolutely experienced something that they could not explain. You can hear Hickson say, quote, "Jesus Christ, God have mercy. I thought I'd been through enough of hell on this earth, and now I've got to go through something like this. But they could have, I guess they could have harmed us, son." And you also hear him say, quote, "They had us. They could have done anything to us, but they didn't hurt me." Then you can hear Parker say, quote, "I just want to cry right now. What's so damn bad about it is nobody's going to believe us. I got to get home and get to bed and take some nervous pills or something, see a doctor or something. I can't stand this. I'm about to go all to pieces. I can't sleep like it is. I'm damn near crazy." Then he begged Hickson not to tell the cops anything more because they didn't believe them, and the creatures could come back and get them. When the officers returned, Parker stayed silent while Hickson continued to answer their questions. But it was the recording that neither man knew was being done that made Sheriff Ryder a believer. The story of the Pascagoula abduction quickly made it to the media, and despite the general public ridiculing both men, Hickson continued to give interviews, and he even made TV appearances. He was a guest on To Tell the Truth in 1974, which, by the way, you can also watch online, and it's pretty interesting. I would say that he 100% believes what he says. Now, if you've never seen that show, To Tell the Truth, there's a panel of 3 people. One of them is the actual person, and then the other 2 are what they called imposters. And they would lie to try and trick a panel into picking them as the actual person who experienced something. Now, imposters on that show could win $500. But in that episode, 2 out of the 4 panelists actually chose Hickson as the actual truth teller. So I'm not sure if that means that he went home with any money or not, but I have to say he honestly struck me as someone who would not make it all up just to win a few dollars. J. Allen Hynek of Project Blue Book even studied the case, according to the Hines Community College website, and he deemed it authentic, saying, quote, "There is no question in my mind that these men have had a very real, frightening experience." Hickson continued to tell his story, even self-publishing a book about his experience in 1983 titled UFO Contact at Pascagoula. Parker attended numerous UFO conventions, started a production company that focused solely on UFO encounter stories, and published his own book in 2018. Skeptics, like Joe Nickel, who we've mentioned before, argue that it was all a hoax, concocted by Hickson while he was in some sort of walking dream state, and that Parker initially said that he'd passed out at the beginning of the encounter and didn't regain consciousness until it was all over. So he could have easily been manipulated by Hickson into corroborating something that didn't actually happen. Supporters point out, and Parker himself has said in past interviews, that he told authorities he passed out because he was afraid to tell them what had actually happened, which can actually be corroborated by the audio recording that was recorded without his knowledge. Attending UFO conventions and writing books about your experience seems like a natural and pretty normal way to try and understand an experience that you can't explain. Both Hickson and Parker have passed away, Hickson in 2011 and Parker in 2023. In June of 2019, the city of Pascagoula erected an historical marker at the spot on the river where the men claimed to have had their abduction experience. We'll probably never know if the Pascagoula abduction of October 11, 1973, did happen or not. And to be fair, the creatures from their encounter weren't given some sort of fancy name like Lobster Claw Man. But just 6 days later, in Falkville, Alabama, new Chief of Police Jeff Greenhaw had an encounter with another robotic humanoid creature that has come to be known as the Falkville Metal Man. Just 6 days later.
Coincidence?
It's awfully coincidental. According to the Pararational.com article, The Legendary Falkville Metal Man Encounter, on the night of October 17th, Chief Greenhaw was at home when he received a phone call from an anonymous woman who claimed a UFO with blinking lights had landed in a field owned by a man named Bobby Summerford, just outside of town. Greenhaw didn't put a lot of stock into all the UFO reports that year, and it was his day off. But he grabbed his Polaroid camera, called the station to let them know where he was headed, hopped into his patrol car, and headed out. He was pretty certain that he wasn't going to find anything, or if he did, it would certainly just be some kids pulling a prank. When he got to the field, he didn't see anything, just like he figured he wouldn't. But he drove around for about 15 minutes, just to be sure. Convinced now that it was just some annoying prank, he turned onto the dirt road heading back towards town. Somebody was standing in the middle of the road, and Chief Greenhaw assumed it was Bobby Summerford, coming to see who was driving around out there in his field. But as he slowly drove closer and his headlights fully shone on the figure, he quickly realized that it was probably not Summerford, since the figure was wearing some sort of silver suit. In an interview with Redwater Filmworks, Greenhaw said his next thought was that his initial theory was right, that, quote, some idiot was out there trying to prank people.
Well, it was either that or some dude running in one of those silver suits that, help you lose weight. Did they have them back then?
I didn't think of that. It could have been. As Greenhaw stared at this strange figure, it just didn't add up. First, the figure was at least 6 feet tall, and the silver metallic suit that it was wearing seemed to be all one piece without a single seam, covering its entire body from its feet all the way over the top of its head. Sticking up from the top of its head was a thin antenna. Picture the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz, but instead of the dull silver of his costume, picture a super reflective aluminum foil kind of texture covering the figure entirely, including its face, with no visible seams whatsoever. Completely baffled, Greenhaw stopped the car and got out. The figure just stood there, motionless, in the middle of the dirt road. So Greenhaw said, "Hello," and the figure just stood there. So Greenhaw slowly reached into his car, grabbed his Polaroid, and slowly brought it up to his face. He managed to snap 4 photographs. Then he reached in and turned on his blue flashing lights, just to see how reflective the being's suit really was. Startled by the flashing lights, the being turned and started swiftly walking away. Too swiftly for a normal human encased in an uncomfortable metal suit. Greenhaw jumped into his car and started following it, even considering running the thing down if he had to. And this is where Greenhaw really began to wonder just what the heck he was chasing. Because despite reaching speeds of 35 miles per hour in his car along a bumpy dirt road, the being, which came to be known as Metal Man, outran him. But even outran isn't the right word, because Greenhaw said the Metal Man didn't run like a normal human either. It seemed to almost leap from spot to spot, but in an awkward way, not in a graceful one. He followed it for as long as he could, but when his car got stuck, he couldn't do anything but sit there and watch as the Metal Man bounded off into the darkness and disappeared. Whatever he had just seen didn't seem to be from this world. Within 2 days, Greenhaw, like Hickson and Parker, was an unwilling celebrity. Everyone seemed to know his story, including news agencies, and his encounter story went national. Public sentiment was skeptical and, in some instances, downright cruel. He was ridiculed for either trying to pull off a hoax himself or being gullible enough to fall for one. Or maybe it was even some sort of publicity stunt to bring tourists to Falkville. But if that was the case, why did he start receiving threatening phone calls at his house? And why did someone mess with his car, causing his engine to explode?
I'm surprised the men in black didn't show up eventually.
Well, I think that's what they're kind of implying, that there were things being done to him that didn't really make sense. Like, why did somebody blow up his car?
You know, as amazing as it would be to see something, the ridicule that you would go through just trying to tell anybody about your story, it just doesn't seem worth it.
Which is why I always second guess these people that say that, you know, they were hoaxing people. Because why would you do that to yourself? The constant ridicule and harassment from both the press and the community caused problems in his marriage, and his wife filed for divorce. Then, on November 9th, someone set fire to his house, burning it to the ground. A few weeks later, he was asked to step down as chief of police. In 1983, someone broke into his home and took just 3 things: the 2 guns he carried the night of his encounter and the 4 Polaroids he had taken of the Metal Man. Luckily, newspapers had run copies of the pictures, so you can still find them online if you want to look for yourself. I think the biggest question is it just a human man in a costume?
I don't know. To outrun a police car? That would be quite incredible.
It looks like, you know how he said it looks like the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz?
Yeah.
That is what it looks like, but much more reflective and very tinfoily. And even if it was a human in a costume like that, they still can't figure out how that person could have outrun the police car in a costume like that.
Yeah, and why would he go through all that and lose his job?
Right.
And he would want to keep his credibility. Why would you make up something like that? You knew damn well what was going to happen.
Right. He lost his house and his car and his wife and his job.
And probably his dog, too. She probably took the dog. Poor bastard.
Well, over the years, plenty of people have weighed in with their own theories. The article, The Metal Man of Falkville, the bizarre encounter that became an urban legend, on the website patrickguido.com, does a really nice job of summing up the various theories. First, despite Greenhaw's initial skepticism, the country was in the middle of a major UFO sighting flap in the 1970s. I mean, like I said, the Pascagoula abduction case happened barely a week earlier. Plus, the whole encounter began with an anonymous phone call claiming a UFO had been spotted. So, it's possible that Greenhaw had allowed himself to be influenced by the power of suggestion simply because UFOs and aliens were already on everybody's minds. Second, the article points out that the Metal Man could have been a human in some sort of protective environmental suit. He was in the middle of a field, after all, and it could have been someone spraying some sort of pesticide. However, Bobby Summerford, the owner of the field, never said that he, or anyone else for that matter, was in his field spraying that night. But it has been kind of batted back and forth as a possible explanation. Third, there's the hoax theory. And like I had said before, people have suggested that Greenhaw came up with the entire idea himself, or that he was the victim of a prank. But like you and I just said, victim is the operative word because he pretty much lost everything. So why would you do that? But if you do find the photos online, if you look at them, in all fairness, I have to say that I do see why people say that. Because it does look like a human in a tinfoil suit. It does. But that doesn't explain how a man in a tinfoil suit could outrun a police car on a dirt road going 35 miles per hour. Or why you would take the risk of pranking a police chief who has a loaded gun.
Well, that's another thing. He could have took out his gun at any time and just shot him in the back.
He said he planned on running him over if he had to.
Right. You're taking a hell of a chance.
Yes, you are. See, it doesn't make sense. So, unfortunately, nobody on the police force actually went out into the field to do any sort of follow-up. There was never any search for footprints or signs of the car chase or even signs of a UFO landing, which is kind of weird. Like, why didn't anybody bother? See how bothered I am? Why didn't anybody bother to follow up?
Well, they just didn't believe him, so they figured there was no reason to. But here's the thing. If you want to prove somebody wrong, you need to go out there and debunk everything that you possibly can.
Instead of just ridiculing and laughing at the man.
Right.
Yeah.
At least give him a fair chance.
Right. Well, it's possible that the Pascagoula abduction case and the Falkville Metal Man aren't even related at all. But it's also a possibility, because it is a very strange coincidence.
Perhaps it was just some aliens visiting that packed some budget spacesuits.
They thought it would be colder in Alabama than it was.
We're going to go to Earth, but, we're spending all our money on this trip, and, well, we really don't have the clothes for it. Where are these?
It's possible. You never know. They could have made him some pancakes. They didn't even, the three aliens in Pascagoula didn't even offer.
That is sad. They could have brought him some alien candy or something.
I don't think I would want to try alien candy. That just seems like a bad idea.
Yeah, especially if they're driving a van. I wouldn't accept any candy from aliens driving a van. You might end up getting probed.
Ew. There's no probing in either of my stories.
I know, which is kind of odd. Everybody seems to get probed when they're taken on board.
No, other than In the Pascagoula case, other than the aliens holding on to them with their lobster claw hands, they didn't actually touch them. The eye thing just went around them. And in the To Tell the Truth episode, they asked Hickson if they took his clothes off, and he said no. It just kind of floated around like it was scanning.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Hey, did you know? The first human voice to ever be transmitted over radio waves belonged to a Canadian-American physicist named Reginald A. Fessenden. Sitting next to his spark gap transmitter in Brant Rock, Massachusetts on December 23rd in the year 1900, Fessenden said, quote, 1, 2, 3, 4. Is it snowing where you are, Mr. Thiessen? If it is, would you telegraph back to me? 1 mile away, Mr. Thiessen did indeed hear the question. Who'da thunk it? All right, we're back. And what are you going to be telling everybody about tonight?
For my story tonight, I'm going to be telling everyone about an unsolved mystery that started off in Lake Placid, New York, just about 45 minutes from where we live. And it's a place that I spent a great deal of time after high school skiing and enjoying the nightlife. The man standing outside the Sacramento International Airport on February the 13th, 2018, seemed rather distressed. At the very least, he appeared confused. Maybe other travelers sidestepped him, hoping to avoid any sort of interaction with him. Or maybe they felt sorry for him as he looked around in a dazed sort of way. But it's also just as likely that hardly anyone noticed him at all. He was dressed in full ski clothes, which isn't exactly the usual way a person dresses for plane travel. But with several ski resorts nearby, it wasn't totally weird, perhaps just a bit odd. But when he pulled his brand new phone out of his pocket and called his wife, it is possible that everyone around him just shrugged it off and focused their attention on their own destinations. After all, it was a very busy airport, and everyone had places to go. The dazed and confused 49-year-old man, whose name was Danny, knew that he also had somewhere to go, home. But for the life of him, he had no idea how he ended up where he was, 2,500 miles away from where he had started. Because Danny had indeed been skiing, but not at Soda Springs Mountain or Discovery Basin or even Lake Tahoe. He had been skiing at Whiteface Mountain in Lake Placid, New York. Somehow, Danny had traveled from the Adirondack Mountains of New York State to Sacramento, California, over the course of 6 days, but he had no idea how he had done it. And to this day, 7 years later, nobody else really seems to know how he did it either. The Danny Fillipidis case is one of those mysteries that just doesn't make sense. And Beth and I remember this case because it was all over our local news. The village of Lake Placid is just a scenic 53-mile ride from our house. We've both spent a lot of time there over the years, and it's a great little town to visit for the afternoon. There's a picture-perfect main street lined with shops and restaurants, several high-end hotels, a performing arts center, and the Olympic Training Center. Plus, it's also the home to Whiteface Mountain, one of the most popular ski areas in the entire state. Most people know Lake Placid because of the 1980 Winter Olympics and the Miracle on Ice, when the U.S. beat the Soviet Union's hockey team 4-3. Lake Placid also hosted the 1932 Winter Olympics and then the 1972 and 2023 Winter World University Games and the 2000 Goodwill Winter Games. It's a major hub for winter athletes of all kinds, and has been used as a training site for Olympic X Games and Can-Am athletes for decades. Initially an iron ore mining town, Lake Placid was a tiny village within the larger town of North Elba. Lake Placid's population in 1840 was made up of just 6 families. In 1845, philanthropist Garrett Smith bought a massive amount of land in the area, which he ended up giving to former enslaved individuals. Abolitionist John Brown heard about Smith's land reform and left Kansas for North Elba. He purchased 244 acres and founded the Freed Slave Utopian Experiment, also known as Timbuktu, a community where freed slaves could have their own land and become self-sufficient. Today, the John Brown Farm is a popular historical landmark in North Elba, where you can tour his farmhouse and visit his gravesite. By the late 1800s, Lake Placid was a premier vacation spot for the wealthy. Men like Melville Dewey, the inventor of the Dewey Decimal System, opened up elite clubs like the Placid Park Club, and people with money came in droves. Now, just to be totally transparent, Dewey was a raging anti-Semite, and he didn't allow Jews into his club. But other places like the Lake Placid Club were thankfully more open-minded and inclusive. Nearby Saranac Lake had a tuberculosis clinic that offered the promise of fresh mountain air and beautiful views. To be fair, Lake Placid has a lot to offer outdoor enthusiasts all year round, but it was definitely billed as a bustling winter town. By 1921, it had ski jumps and a speed skating arena. It was also a haven for filmmakers, and several early motion pictures were filmed there. After World War II, it was a safe haven for refugees from both Germany and Austria. The Performing Arts Center has hosted big-name performers over the years, from Tina Turner to Bryan Adams, Kenny Rogers, and the Pointer Sisters. It's also the birthplace of singer Lana Del Rey. But most notably, it's the home of Whiteface Mountain, with its 96 trails stretching across 25 miles. The skiing history of Whiteface, or Cloud Splitter as it was known by the indigenous people, began in the 1920s when Norwegian skier Herman Smith Johansson arrived and designed the first trails on the mountain. Initially, cross-country skiing and ski jumping was the most popular, but after the 1932 Olympic Games, alpine skiing became all the rage. Whiteface Mountain had the longest beginner ski trail in the state, and then the first certified Class A racing trail. After World War II, Whiteface saw yet another boom in construction, with 20 miles of new trails, and the Whiteface Mountain Ski Center officially opened in 1958. The Cloud Splitter Gondola, one continuous lift ride that goes all the way to the top of the mountain, opened in 1999. State-of-the-art snowmaking machines and a premier lodge have continued to make Whiteface one of the most popular ski resorts in the Northeast. So that brings us to February of 2018, when Danny Fillipidis and several of his colleagues from the Toronto Fire Service made their annual trip to Lake Placid to go skiing. It seems as though they were having a great time. According to the CBC Canada website, on the last day of their trip, February 7th, as the group relaxed in the lodge, Danny knew that he wanted to take some pictures of the group, but he realized that he had left his phone in his car. Danny told the group that he'd be right back and skied off towards his car in the parking area. Somehow, he took a wrong turn. The next thing that he remembers was waking up on the ground. It was dusk, and he had no idea how he had fallen, or how he had hit his head. But he was sore and pretty disoriented. He managed to make his way to what he thought was the main ski lodge, but it was completely dark and locked up. Later, investigators believe that Danny had actually stumbled into the children's ski hub area, which would have been closed at that time of the day. But At the time, Danny thought it was the main lodge, and not understanding why it was closed or where everyone had gone, he thinks he flagged down an 18-wheeler and asked the driver to get him off the mountain. Danny remembers climbing into the cab of the truck, wearing his ski boots and winter clothing, but he doesn't remember what the truck driver looked like. He doesn't recall speaking with the driver, but he does remember having a crushing headache and a feeling of intense fatigue. The next thing that he remembers is being sick on the side of the road and asking where he was. The driver told him that he was in Utah. Meanwhile, when Danny hadn't returned to the lodge back at Whiteface by 4 p.m., his friends knew that something had to be very wrong. According to Adirondack Life magazine, Whiteface Ski Patrol is constantly patrolling the mountain during the hours of operation, there to help the 500 to 600 daily skiers with any injuries. It's pretty common for people to become separated from their family members or friends, but most of the time, they are reunited without any incident, but not this time. Ski Patrol, snowmakers, and DEC forest rangers searched for Danny until 4 a.m. His phone was still in his car, and his skis were discovered on the property as well. Within days, 100 volunteers joined the search effort. Whiteface Mountain remained open. Their thought was that if they did, it would increase the chances that someone might find him. Then, New York State Police joined the search, as well as Homeland Security and Border Patrol. They deployed helicopters, drones, and rescue dogs. They searched for a total of 7,000 hours, and still, no one could find Danny.
I totally remember that because it was all over the news. People were really worried, and there were hundreds of people looking for him.
Yeah, that there was, because it's not something that happens very often.
No.
6 days later, on February 13th, Danny's wife got a phone call. It was her husband, and he was calling from 2,500 miles away in Sacramento. To this day, Danny doesn't remember what happened to him, beyond the few snippets of the 18-wheeler and of being in and out of consciousness. According to the CBC article, for most of the cross-country trek, he thought he was just having a bad dream. But when the truck stopped and the driver said it was the end of the line, Danny got out. He didn't have his wallet on him, but he did have the brand new credit card that he had gotten especially for the ski trip, and $1,000 in cash in his pocket. So he got a haircut of all things. Then, as he wandered the city, it dawned on him that he needed to call his wife. The only problem was that he also didn't have a cell phone on him, so he visited several Sacramento stores trying to buy a new one, but most of them refused to sell him one without any ID. Eventually, he was able to purchase a brand new iPhone, but when he tried to call his wife, he realized that he didn't even know her phone number. So he went online. I assume that it was to try and contact her through social media or email. And that's when he saw the stories about the missing Toronto firefighter who had disappeared on Whiteface Mountain.
Can you imagine going online and discovering that you're missing and that people have been looking for you for 6 days?
No, but I can imagine it was a real mind melt for him.
Well, yeah, I would think, absolutely.
According to an article in the Times-Union, investigators believe that Danny spent the night near Richards Boulevard, somewhere along the Interstate 5 corridor. The next day, Danny somehow traveled the 13 miles from Richards Boulevard to the Sacramento Airport's rental car lot. And it was while he was there, still dressed in his ski clothes and wandering a little aimlessly, that his wife's phone number suddenly came back to him. So he called her, and she frantically told him to call 911. Even in the hospital, Danny couldn't recall any more details about how he had gotten from a ski slope in the Adirondacks of northern New York to California. He was certain that a truck driver had brought him there, but it was a complete mystery who the truck driver was, or why he drove him across the country when all Danny thought he had asked for was to be taken off the mountain. Doctors, including neurologists and neuropsychologists, confirmed that Danny had a concussion and was suffering from either a fugue state or a temporary amnesia. Investigators do believe that Danny somehow suffered a head injury on the way to his car, although he himself doesn't remember falling or hitting his head or being hit on the head by someone else. They also think that he did wander to the closed children's ski area, thinking it was the main lodge. But that's where the mystery both ends and begins, because they have never been able to locate the truck driver who picked him up and brought him to California. So they have no idea why a truck driver would agree to do that, especially since Danny was obviously injured. They have even questioned if there was a truck driver at all. There's only one route in and out of Whiteface Mountain, and it includes a notoriously narrow and windy stretch of road known as the Wilmington Notch, or, as the locals say, the Notch.
I hate the Notch, and I don't think I have ever driven it myself.
Bordered by mountains on one side and a rock wall on the other side that keeps cars from going off the road and down the steep cliffs into the Au River, it's a rather treacherous road to travel. 18-wheelers traveling the Notch is such a rare thing that narrowing it down to who the truck driver could have been should have been very easy, especially one traveling from the Adirondacks to California. Since 2018, Danny has only given one interview to the media. He stated that he felt very lucky to have survived his ordeal and that he would like to know what happened. But the most important thing for him was getting back to work and his normal life. Now, I know that the local media here was incredibly glad to hear that Danny was found safe. They ran several updates on the news and in the papers about his resurfacing in Sacramento.
You know what's funny is I distinctly remember you saying to me one day, they found that guy.
Yes, I did.
And I remember thinking, oh, they found him in California. But I never realized that it was still a mystery of what happened to him.
Right. You know, I heard the story pretty much when it broke, and I followed it a bit. But then when he was found, I was like, this absolutely makes no sense. It's not even believable. I thought he just kind of left and he just wanted out of everything, perhaps. So he was just running away.
Mm-hmm.
But then when he called his wife, something doesn't make sense here.
There's a lot of things that don't make sense here.
Yeah, the whole story is a bit weird. And it might possibly never be solved.
Right.
I don't know. I could see maybe you're walking to your car with your skis in your hand. You slip on a patch of ice, which, you know, those of you who are listening to this that have ever been Whiteface Mountain, well, it's a beautiful mountain, but we have always called it Iceface because when conditions are good, they're good. But most of the time, it's icy as hell. It's really not my favorite place to ski. And back in the day, they didn't have night skiing, which that's what we all want to do. But I could see him slipping, possibly hitting his head, or the skis coming down, cracking him on the top of the head. But yeah, I don't know. It's so strange.
It's just odd.
And why would a truck driver pick him up and take him to Sacramento?
Knowing that he was injured. I mean, obviously, if he's going in and out of consciousness and throwing up on the side of the road, there's something wrong.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what to think about this story. So I also found this a bit weird. While researching Whiteface Mountain, I came across a cool facts page on their website. Apparently, Whiteface Mountain had a record-breaking day on February 18th, 2018, when 6,439 people skied or rode the trails. At first, I had thought that I had read it wrong, but no. It was 5 days after Danny Fillipidis was found.
Just 5 days later.
Yeah.
Over 6,000 people skied at Whiteface.
Right. So, as with many ski areas, out by your cars, there's always a lot of traffic. There's always people coming and going. How did nobody ever notice this dude?
I don't know, but could we back up for a second? I'm not a skier. So in February, are there generally like good deals where people get passes, or there's something special about going skiing in February that there would be 6,000 people there on that one day?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
I always had a season's pass, so it didn't matter what day I went.
Yeah. I'm just wondering why 5 days later it was like their record-breaking day.
I don't know.
But yeah, you're right. If they average, what did you say earlier, 500 or 600 people a day,
yeah,
you would think somebody would have seen him, something.
Yeah.
They saw him get into an 18-wheeler at the very least and went, oh my gosh, there's an 18-wheeler that somehow got here through the notch.
Right. It's all very strange.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps someday we'll know.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, with that said, the world is indeed a strange place, and strange things happen.
And like we've always said with our unsolved mystery stories that we've done, we hope that somebody who knows something at some point will come forward and share what they know.
Yeah, or perhaps he'll just remember what happened.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah. Well, if you'd like to know more, Beth, take it away.
You can always check our sources in our show notes. And you can do all kinds of researching and reading for yourself.
And that about wraps it up for this episode, all you fellow wanderers. Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.